Well, hello, commercial law and ethics warriors. How are you today? It's a gorgeous 30 degrees in Vermtown here today. We got snow on the lawn here. We've got the reindeer, feeding out here. We've got sleighs going up and down Cherry Street. So, yeah, it's April in Vermilion. So, hopefully, you are a little warmer wherever you are. But welcome to another scintillating, didactic, and provocative session involving commercial law and ethics. Last week we had a really good conversation about real estate. This week we're talking about personal property in bailments in greater detail. So you are learning all sorts of new things that we hope you will enjoy and appreciate. So we're back to our old French friend Voltaire, right? Before you address me, define your terms. So, Professor Huck, what do these legal terms mean that we use in commercial law? Well, we talked about real estate last week. We now know what that is, right? In agonizing detail. Well, this week we're going to talk about personal property. And so what do we mean when we use the term personal property? Well, yes, personal property can mean stocks, right? Equities, bank accounts, email accounts, contracts, and crops are all personal property, as distinguished from real estate that we talked about last week, or future interests. So let's talk about, how property sometimes is transferred. And how do we transfer legal ownership of personal property? Usually by transferring, it in terms of possession. But sometimes you may have title. So let's take, for example, an automobile. An automobile is personal property. And how do we transfer ownership of an automobile? Normally by signing over the title on it, by signing on the back of the automobile registration that you are transferring it to a named party. Then that named party takes that title down to the county recorder's office and has a new title issued in the name of the new owner. So, but other than by sale, of course, property can be transferred by gift. We all have received lots of gifts, right? Christmas time, we give lots of gifts, right? At least my family demands that I give lots of gifts. And so certainly even as a gift, we are transferring legal ownership from one party to another without the need for any contract consideration. So what's actually involved in a lawful gift? Well, certainly you have to have the intent to transfer the personal property to another. In the case of selling an automobile, you certainly have to have the intent to want to transfer the ownership to another party. Certainly delivering the property, the possession of the property, is a component of a legal gift transfer. And then, of course, acceptance. Yes, it's true. The party that you want to give the gift to has to want to accept it. And they certainly can reject the gift. And I've had that on occasion before where property's been transferred and wanting to be transferred, and yet the intended transferee, the party receiving the gift, says, no, I don't want to take this on. It's too much responsibility. I don't want to pay the taxes. I don't want to do it. So that is a component of a gift, is you got to have a willing receiver, right? What about an intent to make a gift in the future. So let's take, for example, if you do not marry before you graduate from college, I will make you a gift of a brand new BMW automobile. Well, while we would say there certainly is some consideration, some detriment, some legal detriment on the part of the party that has to agree not to get married and yet fulfill the obligation to graduate from college. Once that is performed, well, you've got a future interest, if you will, that now comes due. And this certainly can be seen as a form of contract that is enforceable. Well, what are revocable gifts as opposed to irrevocable gifts? Well, a revocable gift is where the party who is giving the personal property gift retains some control over the item, and that the owner can withdraw the gift from the recipient, and that's what makes it a revocable gift. Now, let me distinguish this from an irrevocable gift. This is one where, hey, once you give it to another party, that's it. You can't take it back under any circumstances. So let me give you, for example, what we have here at the University of South Dakota. We have a foundation, the University of South Dakota Foundation. And when you want to make a gift, even though it's a pledge, in the sense that you pay so much each quarter or annually on your gift pledge, the foundation is going to provide you a document whereby you make an irrevocable gift of whatever the total of your pledges are and whatever your payment schedule is going to be. So once you sign that, it becomes, if you will, a contract, and it's irrevocable. You can't change your mind that you no longer want to pay on the gift, but it's irrevocable because you set it up that way. Now, a gift inter vivos, and the term inter vivos means it is a gift that is given during one's lifetime. So clearly, Christmas time, we're all giving lots of gifts, right? Those are gifts inter vivos, gifts that are given during our lifetime, as distinguished from gifts that are given after our death. So, for example, wills, right? A person's will that is executed after they die provide, if you will, gifts to named heirs. Gift causa mortis. Gift causa mortis. So let's take a really interesting case example. I like the Albinger versus Harris case. We've got Harris and Albinger who lived together, and they announced their engagement. And of course, as is the tradition, when one enters into an engagement with another, they usually have the engagement ring that is given by one spouse to be to another. But of course, as fate would have it, which happens sometimes, the engagement is broken off. And then the party receiving the ring, returns it, which is what happened here. But Harris and Albinger repeated this cycle of getting engaged, having some type of dispute, giving the ring back. So this goes on several times over a period of 3 years. In fact, the disagreement escalates to the point where one party even holds a knife to the throat of the other would-be spouse and threatens to cut off her finger if she doesn't give the engagement ring back. Wow. This is sort of, they deserve each other, right? Well, but nevertheless, of course, the question becomes, ultimately, when they finally end their crazy affair, Harris, the woman involved, keeps the ring. And so Albinger, the male spouse wants the value of the ring returned to him because he claims it was a conditional gift in contemplation of marriage. And the trial court agreed with Mr. Harris. But on appeal, the question becomes, hey, who really owns this ring? Is it the party that gave the ring to the recipient, or is it the recipient? And so the question becomes, well, when did ownership of the ring truly transfer from one party to another? Was this a revocable or an irrevocable gift, do you think? Well, what's our legal rule here? Once a gift is accepted, the donor has no more rights in the property and may not demand its return. So we've got the male party certainly giving the ring to the female, party. And is she keeping it? Yeah, she's, keeping it. And so Montana gift law makes no provision for conditional gifting except in the context of a gift that's in contemplation of death. And so the appellate court reversed the trial court saying, no. Harris, the lady involved here, received an irrevocable gift and she's entitled to keep it. Too bad, so sad, dear Dad, Mr. Albinger. So let's talk about abandoned and lost property. We all have lost stuff, right? Catholics pray to a fellow by the name of St. Anthony, hoping that he will help find lost property. But what is the legal distinction between abandoned and lost property? Well, abandoned property is where an owner of property has discarded it because he or she no longer wants it. Now, the finder of property has to prove that the owner intended to relinquish all rights, whereas lost property is something that is accidentally given up. The finder of property has superior rights in the found property, except to the true owner. The true owner of property has a legal right to reclaim it. So let's take, for example, our weekly garbage pickup, right? Our weekly garbage pickup. Well, our weekly garbage pickup would be an example of abandoned property, right? Abandoned property. So when the garbage man comes, picks up the garbage and puts it in the garbage can, it is legally abandoned property and now becomes the property of the garbage party. What about lost property? We all have lost stuff before. So let's take, for example, our wallets or our purses that are left at a restaurant, and a restaurant worker finds the wallet or the purse and looks and finds the identification of the party who it belongs to. It still belongs to the party that lost it. And so the finder, their interest becomes subject to the right of the true owner. In other words, they have a legal obligation to transfer the property back to the rightful owner. Now, what about, mislaid property? I think we're talking again about lost property. The finders get no right in such property, as I just put. If the true owner cannot be found, so let's say, you've got a wallet with money in it, but no identification for some reason. Or maybe a money clip with money in it, but you don't know who it belongs to. Well, the mislaid item belongs to the owner of the premises where it is found. So let me give you an example of what we call here in South Dakota a treasure trove, sometimes referred to legally as dormant bank accounts. That after a period of time, if a bank account has no activity, then the state of South Dakota will take that dormant bank account funds and it'll become state property. Property that is usually coins or currency where the true owner most likely is dead, the finder, keeps it. And so in the case of dormant bank accounts, it is the state after a period of time that takes the property. And actually here in South Dakota, that is several millions of dollars each year that the state receives from banks from dormant accounts. Now, it is true that virtually all states have what are called finding statutes, or sometimes referred to, and this is a legal term, as an estray statute that sets up a system for, who owns found property. Normally, so let's take South Dakota, for example, and livestock. Once in a while, livestock in South Dakota breaks loose, right? Not unusual in a state like ours for cattle to get out, or horses, or whatever. So the question becomes, who owns the cattle? Who owns, the horses that have broken out? Well, our state statutes require that livestock be turned over to the police or the owner where they happen to be found. So in South Dakota, the livestock have to be turned over to the county sheriff within 10 days. And then after a stated period of time, if there is no claim made by the rightful owner, then the livestock will go to whoever it was that found it. And this is actually the reason why owners of cattle and horses have branding, so that they can identify their property when it does occasionally get loose. Let me give you another example. I was interested in buying a house on the edge of town here, actually outside the city limits, which was at one time known as the Clay County Poorhouse. It was a very large house and had about 5 acres around it. And I was interested in buying it. The owner asked me why I wanted the 5 acres. I said, well, I wanted to raise buffalo. He looked at me like I was from outer space and said, Huck, do you know anything about buffalo? And I said, well, quite frankly, no, but I'm interested in learning. So he looked at me with a really strange look and said, well, buffalo are the meanest beasts known to man. And he said, well, I've got, some fencing here. There's no way this fencing will keep them in. They're going to get out. And when they get out, you're going to be liable for any damage they do. So clearly, if my buffalo got out, I would be responsible for whatever damage they would create. No, I didn't go through on that deal. I was convinced maybe buffalo were a bad idea and a bad investment. Well, here's an interesting old case going back to 1722, the Amory versus Delamere case that actually involves a chimney sweep. All right, do you know what a chimney sweep was or is? Well, a chimney sweep in Old England involved young children who could squeeze down chimney flues, that is, the top of the chimney, because you needed to clean them out at least annually so that the creosote in them didn't catch fire and set your roof on fire. So you needed these little boys to be able to get down in these spaces to chip away at the creosote and clean the chimney. Well, there's this one chimney sweep boy who finds a jeweled diamond ring while working in one of these chimneys. Finders keepers, losers weepers, right? Well, the young chimney sweep took it to a local goldsmith to discover its true value. The goldsmith's apprentice removed the jewels from the ring and pretended to weigh it when he said it was worth 3 halfpence. That's not very much. The sweep refused the offer of the three halfpence and asked for return of the ring. But the apprentice gave him the ring without the jewels, so of course the sweep sues it. And the question becomes, hey, does the chimney sweep have a legal right to retain the found jewels? And the court here said, well, look, the rule of law is the finder of a jewel, though he does not, by such finding, acquire absolute property right or ownership, but does have such property right as will enable him to keep it against all but the rightful owner. So the chimney sweep got to keep the jewels and the ring. Clearly, if the rightful owner, let's say the owner of the house, the owner of the chimney, if they were to make a claim, they would probably be the rightful owner in that the item was found on the property. So unless the defendant did produce the jewel, the law should presume the strongest value against him and make the value the best jewels that the measure of the damages would be. What's an accession? What's an accession? An accession is when someone adds labor or materials or both to add value to personal property. So for example, when we take our automobiles in every 6 months to have the oil change and other types of maintenance performed, windshield wipers changed, so forth and so on, we can probably agree that the labor and materials involved add value, some value, doesn't matter how much value, but it adds value to the personal property. Now, that's what, of course, creates, even though you may not have a written contract with the repair shop, nevertheless, the accession law is, look, did you request that labor and materials be added to this automobile? Yes, that's why I brought the car in. Well, guess what? You legally have an obligation to pay whoever provided the labor and materials under the accession rule. So, but how about if you take your car in to be serviced, but instead of, but in addition to servicing it, the repair shop takes the engine out and rehabilitates, the engine, though you didn't ask for that to be done. Well, if that is done without the permission of the owner, as you logically would assume, the owner takes the improved property without having to pay for it because the owner didn't enter into a contract or an agreement that that's what they wanted to have done. And so that's sometimes a scam that happens. That's why you only want to take your automobiles to be serviced at repair shops that have good reputations. And so, for example, when I came to Vermilion in 2003, one of the first things I did was ask around among my colleagues here at the business school, where do they take their cars to have them serviced? And most of the people I talked to, recommended Bob Sinclair Station down on Main Street. And that's where I've been taking my cars for 13 years. Bob values his reputation, and that's why he does very well. So an accession sometimes is made under the reasonable mistaken belief he's entitled to such accessions, and the owner has got to pay for it. So it may be, while an oil change is an oil change, but it also involves an oil filter and may involve some other items such as, spark plug changes and whatnot. Well, guess what? That's a reasonable mistaken belief. If you only wanted the oil and nothing else, well, that wasn't clearly stated or agreed to, and you would be responsible for that because it's reasonable under the circumstances that a service station would exchange out the oil filter and accompanying items. We discussed bailments before. Bailments involve the transfer of a property, personal property, from one person to another. So it certainly involves the rightful possession of goods by someone other than the owner. So when we take in the car to be repaired, we are bailing it. We are bailers. We are bailing our car to a bailee, who is the service station repair people. When we take clothes in to be dry cleaned, we again, as bailors, are bailing the property to the cleaners for the purpose of cleaning it. Now, they don't own, of course, the property. The true owner retains ownership, but bailees have the legal responsibility to take reasonable care over property that is bailed to it. So, for example, if your car is taken into a service station for servicing and repair, and some drunk comes by and throws a brick through the windshield, the bailee, the service station, is responsible for the care and safekeeping and would be liable on that. What is constructive or involuntary bailment? Well, that is, of course, your lost property, where you find a wallet, a purse, property that you know belongs to another. In other words, there's some identification. Well, you don't own the property, but it has been constructively, or if you will, involuntarily bailed to you. And so now that you have possession of the property, you are required to return it to the true owner, and obviously to care for it in between. Now, here's a really interesting case that actually stretches all the way back to World War II and the Nazis. So there's this Hungarian who was an art collector. And of course, here comes, World War II begins in actually September of 1939. And he tries to hide his art collection from the Nazis. But he's unsuccessful. And the Nazis get a hold of it, and they start, selecting certain pieces for Hitler. And Adolf Eichmann was a famous, death camp and SS officer. So he turned what parts that he didn't send off to Hitler to the collaborating Hungarian government for safekeeping. Well, of course, the Herzog family fled, and his heirs were scattered around the world. Well, after the war is over, of course, the Hungarian government, then a communist government in 1945, had possession of this art collection. And as the heirs surfaced, they wanted return of their art collection. And the question becomes, well, was this taking by the Hungarian government and the Nazis, did it create a bailment situation? Now, bailments normally require the mutual consent of the parties, right? But even if a family's consent was induced by duress, we would certainly agree that occurred here, this would mean only that the family could disclaim a bailment existed, which they're not doing. The family was adequately pleaded an element of consent, albeit perhaps involuntary, but a bailment, something like a bailment, certainly occurred here, and the heirs were entitled to return of the property. Now, bailees are legally obligated to return bailed property upon the request or to a designated third party. So, if I were to take my car into Bob's service station and tell him, look, my wife will come in tonight to pick up the car after work, he has an obligation to turn it over to her. Legal duty of due care is required by bailees regarding property they receive from a bailor. If the bailment is for the sole benefit of a bailee, hey, you can borrow my car, then there's a duty of extraordinary care that is owed by the bailee, that is the party to whom you have bailed your car to use. If a bailment is for mutual benefit, then only ordinary care is owed. That is the care that a reasonable person would take under circumstances. So clearly a car repair situation would be a mutual benefit bailment. What does the car repair get from it? Obviously a fee for providing service. What does the owner of the car, the bailor, get? He gets a serviced car. That's a mutual benefit situation. But what happens when we have bailment that is only for the benefit of the bailor? Well, then only slight care is warranted under the circumstances. So we sometimes refer to it as a gratuitous bailment. Gee whiz, would you watch my house while I'm gone? Well, we would agree the only party that's going to receive some type of value would be the owner of the house, right? And that's what we call a gratuitous bailment. And so in order to find the neighbor responsible for any negligence, such as gross negligence, which is considered, they would have to show that the neighbor was reckless or wanton, which led to the damage of the neighbor's house. So let's take, for example, neighbor asks his neighbor, hey, would you watch my house while I'm on vacation? Sure. Here's the keys and all, so you can go in to check and make sure, the pipes don't leak any water, or we don't have an infestation of any type. No problem. But instead, the neighbor takes the keys and decides to have a party, a big, uproarious, fabulous party in his neighbor's house. And damage is done, and there's a huge, enormous party mess afterwards. That would clearly be a case of a gratuitous bailment that involved reckless or wanton conduct, which would constitute gross negligence. And of course, the bailee, in this case, gratuitous or not, would be liable. There's a presumption of negligence, that is, the failure to use due care under the circumstances, which arises for the bailee when the bailer proves a bailment and a loss or harm. Have you ever heard of exculpatory clauses in contracts before? You've seen lots of them. So, for example, when you go to a hat check or coat check, and you check your hat and coat there, and there is a sign that says, not responsible for property left overnight. That's an exculpatory clause that eliminates bailee liability. When you take a car to a service repair station, they frequently have signs that say, not responsible for cars left here more than 3 days. Same thing. It's an exculpatory clause that eliminates bailee liability if that time expires. So the Tannenbaum case, is a classic case of a dry cleaning establishment. And Tannenbaum's got this very expensive shirt. It sounds like it must be a silk shirt that's been tailored. It's $160. But when he went to pick it up, the shirt is now badly torn. Well, while the dry cleaners had denied they tore the shirt, well, it doesn't matter, right? The dry cleaners is a bailee and is responsible for the damages. But the dry cleaner says, hey, on the back of the cleaning ticket, we've got this exculpatory clause that says that limits damages to 10 times the cleaning cost, or in this case, $2 or $20 total. And the question becomes, was the cleaner negligent? Well, under the circumstances, yeah. And if so, did the exculpatory clause limit its liability? Well, given that the clause is printed in gray type against a light yellow background and is significantly difficult for a person with good eyesight to read, gee whiz. And the bailee didn't point out the exculpatory clause. There was no evidence that they showed the exculpatory clause or pointed it out to the customer, and so the bailee was liable for the $160 silk shirt. Now, if a bailor transfers property for the sole benefit of the bailee, then the bailor has to notify the bailee of any known defects. So, for example, if you loan your lawnmower to a neighbor, but it has a tendency to ride rough and cut the lawn unevenly and may even throw rocks at the operator, hey, the bailor has an obligation to notify the bailee of any defects the property has. Same thing, let's say, with an automobile. You're loaning your automobile to your neighbor, but your brakes are mushy. Hey, you need to put your neighbor on notice of that. If a bailment's for mutual benefit, then the bailor also will be liable for unknown defects that the bailor could have discovered with due diligence. So again, if you loan, your car out, hey, you've got a liability to that bailee. With respect to renting property, remember under the UCC, implied warranties apply in contracts. What are they? That when we rent property, so renting a lawnmower, renting an automobile, renting, some type of good, That item has to pass as ordinary goods would in the trade, have to be fit for the purpose for which intended. So clearly, loaning a lawnmower out for one's neighbor's kids to drag race probably would be a violation of the warranty of fitness for a purpose for which intended, because that's not what riding lawnmowers are for. Now, we all have common carriers, right? We got UPS, we got Intermountain Express, we got FedEx. So what's their liable on goods that have clearly been bailed to them for delivery to a new owner? Well, the contract carrier is strictly liable unless the contract limits the liability. So if the carrier serves the general public, then you're going to have strict liability. If he doesn't serve the general public, but only particular customers, then strict liability does not apply, but ordinary care applies. Now, the GNOC Corporation versus Powers is an interesting gambling casino situation where we've got these two fellows that are staying at this Hilton Casino in Atlantic City, which used to be a great, big, huge gambling center in New Jersey. So the plaintiff clearly was a regular gambler at this hotel. And on this particular night, he won $76,000, which he converted into $25,000 in cash, 10 gray chips worth $5,000 each, and one white chip worth $1,000. Now, the plaintiff, stupidly, places his cash, his chips, and his money clip on the dresser in his hotel room before going to bed. Now, at 4:19 in the morning, the hotel issues a second key to the plaintiff's room to an identified person. When the plaintiff arises in the morning, he discovers, guess what? All his property is gone. So, as a consequence, the plaintiff ends up with $25,000 in debt to the casino, and the casino brings suit for the $25,000 that it's owed by the plaintiff, clearly a gambling debt. So the plaintiff counterclaims, which means he argues back that the casino, in fact, owes him $76,000 for the loss of the items in his hotel room. But this is where the law favors the hotel. The hotel argues that the state of New Jersey innkeeper statute bars liability. Why so? Well, the trial judge ruled in favor of the hotel based on the state innkeeper statute. What does the statute provide? That when guests are placed on notice that the hotel provides a safe place for valuable storage, and the customer fails to take advantage of that, hey, that eliminates the liability for the hotel. Now, the plaintiff tries to parse the words in the statute, saying, well, look, the casino chips were not covered by the statute because they were not specifically enumerated in the statute. He also asserts the chips do not belong to the guests and thus are not property of the plaintiff. Did the innkeeper statute protect the hotel? Which is the legal question. The rule of law is, while the statute's listing of items covered is not exhausted, it did include any other articles of similar value, is what was stated in the statute. Do you think that included gambling chips? The court says the chips belong to the guest until redeemed for cash and thus are covered by the statute. The hotel is in strict compliance with the statute's notice requirements, so the plaintiff's recovery is barred by the statute. So the casino wins. So we've had a tour de force tour of personal property, and hopefully you can see the interesting distinctions between abandoned property, lost property, and bailors, bailees, and bailments. As always, I invite your emails, your questions, anything that is of interest that you'd like to more about. I'm here to help you. So until our next blizzard in Vermtown, I wish you well. See you next week. Bye-bye, gang.